All right, welcome to Cloud Talks, episode number 2. We are joining you again on this Thursday. Today is October 9th, and it's a rainy October 9th here in Arizona. What's the weather like there for you, Daniel?
As you can see in that window, I couldn't quite get out of the camera image. It's nice and sunny here in Chicago, but don't let that fool you because it's actually quite chilly. I'm thinking we're going to get another 6 to 25 feet of snow this year, so I may be coming to visit our Phoenix office.
Yeah, there you go.
Not too soon from now.
Yeah, as much as I love air conditioning and I'm thankful for it in the summer, I appreciate shorts on Halloween. But we are October 9th. This is episode number 2. Thrilled to have Tim Crawford on as our guest today. We once again thank our sponsors, IBM and Avnet, for kind of giving us the opportunity to talk to leading experts not only in cloud but in technology and kind of bring them into the community as well as talking with the Twitter chat side. So for everyone out there on Twitter watching kind of the Hangout as well as doing there on Twitter, we'll have the questions posted on Twitter, and I'll be bringing those in for our guest today as well. So without further ado, our guest is Tim Crawford today, joining us, a friend of mine I've known for a good while. We were joking that our last time together was AWS re:Invent about a year ago. So Tim, welcome to Cloud Talks. Glad to have you on today.
Hey Brian, Daniel, great to be joining you today, and great subject, but always good to spend some time and have a conversation about this.
Tim, where are you joining us from? If you don't mind
I'm
sharing.
actually working out of my home office today in California, sunny LA. Oh wait, no, it's actually a little overcast today.
That's just smog, Tim. That's smog. Uh, give us the quick background about, because we selected you because of your expertise, but if people don't trust that we are experts at picking the experts, what makes you an expert?
Well, I fooled you well. No. So I spent over 20 years in IT in a variety of different roles all the way up through CIO. And over the last couple of years, I've been helping other business leaders, including CIOs, kind of connect the dots with emerging technologies and some of these transformational technologies. And it really goes beyond just technology. It also involves the people, the culture, the process. But the important piece there is in advising organizations on what they should do and where they should go and what's best for them, because it's not a one-size-fits-all world.
Yeah, I know, Tim. And one of the things that I think I think we converse almost on a daily basis, and you've done an amazing job of not only leading and advising CIOs and pretty much the C-suite in general on cloud and technology, but you're also a very social person when it comes to engaging on Twitter. I know we have lots of dialogue with Ray Wang and Bala Asfar and the guys that kind of CXO talk in that group. And so I think that's kind of a leading edge one for us, is that as these technologies kind of merge together and things are changing, people are embracing new technology. So I loved your article that we shared out today on just the 5 different points of disruption and transformation that's going on in the cloud world. Before we get to question 1, what's your from the idea of social and things like this, are you seeing this being embraced from at the same rate as cloud, or is it something that social CIOs and social in general is something that has a faster or slower adoption rate?
I think social CIOs are still kind of a rare breed, and there are a number of reasons for that. There are plenty of folks that would suggest reasons why, but my belief is that most of the reason has to do with just a hesitation around what they might say and how that might come back to hurt the company. But of the CIOs that are social, I think of people like Ben Haynes at Box, or I think of Stuart Apley at Shorenstein. Folks that are out there that are having the conversation. Those are also folks that are embracing some of these new technologies too. And so I think it's important that we look at them as role models and figure out ways to both embrace that, but then also address some of those hesitations that you might have from a cultural standpoint.
No, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And those are ones, Ben and Mike from previous from Netflix, now with Yahoo. I
Yep.
think we have it's a kind of a great group of people that are are really leading the charge there. So we'll jump into question one. So question one, and I'll make sure to get out there to our Twitter audience as well, is when you think about the last 5 years when disruption and technology change, what are the biggest disruptors or the biggest change you've seen over the past 5 years leading us up to kind of today?
Yeah, and if you want to jump in and say like 3 years, 1 year, because 5 years gives you a heck of a long window, but we want to give you a choice, whether it's 5 years or the last 5 minutes. But give us the best.
Yeah, I think in the last 5 years, and this kind of comes back to the core of this talk, right? You have to include cloud in that conversation. But I think more so, you have to understand the reasons why cloud is interesting now as opposed to maybe 5 years prior. Virtualization was a pretty prominent opportunity for organizations, not just in the last 5 years, but even a few years before that. But I would say the biggest technology shifts that I've seen in the last few years have been cloud. We see containers. We see a new emphasis on data, which is a great thing. Not for this talk, but something that I get into is talking about the anthropology of IT and how we've kind of come full circle in terms of the importance of data and taking a business focus. But I also think that there are three other pieces that are very interrelated that are starting to cause us to think about how we can up-level the conversation, and that's around big data, the Internet of Things, and the industrial Internet. And so it's those that actually start to drive us to kind of shift down the road and start to think about, okay, how do we leverage containers? How do we leverage cloud? Where does DevOps fit in, and all the other aspects that we hear about today?
No, yeah, and go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was just saying, so if you had to pick one, though, because I was sitting here thinking, I love all the kind of social, big data, mobile, cloud, and I always think of cloud as sort of the epicenter of it all, because mobile is kind of a spoke, right? Without cloud, mobile is not nearly what mobile is. The access to data is empowered by cloud. So cloud kind of becomes at the epicenter. So I kind of was thinking, is it cloud? And then the other thing I think about, or is it social? Like if I had to pick one of the two that's been so disruptive to the way companies do business, I'm looking at these two. So I'm just kind of throwing an extra question in there. Cloud or social, what's more disruptive, or is social built on cloud? Is that the only reason it even exists?
So I think the other aspect, Daniel, is think about it in terms of what's been more disruptive internally versus externally. So if you're looking externally, I would say social by a long margin. But if you're looking internally, I think that I'd have to go with cloud, because I think cloud presents a different model, different consumption model, and opportunity to really kind of leverage for organizations, especially as you start to pull in social and mobile and some of the newer technologies.
That's a great answer. So let's jump into the second question here. I want to talk a little bit about innovation and what's going to drive it. In the next 5 years, right, we think cloud will drive innovation, but is that the biggest driver, or is something else going to be sort of the spurn of what's next for technology?
Yeah, cloud is not the biggest driver. It's the biggest leverage point. So I still think that today, and I've talked a bit about this and written quite a bit about this on GigaOM and through other sources, that probably the single largest driver for innovation is actually coming from the consumer space. So it's consumers that are becoming more technologically savvy. They're starting to understand how to leverage these technologies, right? It's the phone and the mobile devices and the engagement from a technological standpoint. And then that starts to have a waterfall effect. Let's not confuse waterfall with agile, but that starts to have a waterfall effect into other aspects of technology and culture and how we think about leveraging the two.
That just made me think of something, Brian. We need to create a glossary for buzz terms that our guests have, because these guys are all really smart, And so we've got kind of a diverse crowd out there. We've got the guys like me who are kind of social biz that love technology, and then you have the technologists out there. They're like, oh, this all makes sense. He's talking like at a third grade level. So let's get this glossary going here. I need to know more about more about the waterfall effect.
No, yeah, that's funny because go ahead,
I'm
Tim.
trying to throw in as many buzzwords as I can.
I like it because it almost brings me back. I was working a little over 2 years for a data center company, IO, and that's how Tim and I originally connected. And so modular data centers, the waterfall effect, the scalability, agility of modules with DCIM, all these terms that it was making me smile because it was like, oh, these are things that I was living and breathing. So I like the idea of a glossary, Daniel, for sure. And I think along with that, when we're talking about the next 5 years. We were having it was on mobile chat last night or the other night, and the idea that you can't really be social if you're not embracing mobile, and you can't really be mobile if you're not embracing social. I think cloud is also the one that really makes mobile and social kind of possible. What are your thoughts kind of on that side?
Yeah, I would agree. I think mobile drives some of the adoption of cloud because if you were to try and engage mobile using traditional technology and traditional methods, you can do it, but it's really painful. If you start to look at ways to leverage cloud, a lot of those problems have been solved by many of the cloud providers, and so that then becomes a leverage point to help you kind of move forward. But I would say, I mean, look at me. I've got 2 mobile devices that go with me wherever I go traveling around the world, and that's typically the only 2 that I take with me. So when you're talking about social and engagement from cloud, I mean, I live on these 2, and these 2 can't function without cloud and without social. So
are those Apple devices? Are those Apple devices?
Yeah, it's a
Me too.
iPad Air and a
I'm right there with you.
iPhone. But I am a little geeky, yes. Got my Lego case for my phone.
All right, so we've got a lot of Apple in the room, and we just want our viewers to know we do love other platforms, but we just happen to entrust ourselves to iOS in a lot of our mobile lives.
Well, it's kind of like the cloud, right? We want it to just work. A lot of times, like if we geek out with enough things, part of it is it just needs to work. When you're thinking a cloud provider or your cloud service, most of the time it's like I need the lights on. Give me the most reliable solution. That's why I say about Apple and iOS products. And something you said kind of hit home for me because I am also a fellow geek, and I was doing some things on my router the other night, and I was like, I want to see how many connected devices I have in my house, and just perspective is I have 3 daughters, but the oldest is 5, and my wife is a history teacher, and between the Wemo devices, the mobile devices, the Apple TVs, and that world, I have 47 devices connected to my wireless router in my house, and there's a drop cams. So I think that's just like the crazy world that I have like a build your own cloud type solution in my house where everything's running off of a server that I run. And to me, it's all about cloud. It's all about scale and me, being able to use that services. So when we jump into question 3, how has cloud technology changed the way businesses or companies do business, especially from like a C-suite perspective that I know you deal with a lot?
Yeah, the way that cloud really kind of hits the ground and where the leverage point really comes in is in enablement, meaning if you have a business requirement that comes about, cloud presents an opportunity to be able to execute and really provide services around that business requirement much, much more quickly than through traditional means. And so that becomes real interesting because as you start to think about kind of companies as a whole and how we do business, it's really important to understand that the speed in which we do business is increasing. It's not slowing down, it's increasing. Economic impact to the side, right? So we have to figure out how to respond to those changes, respond to those needs as quickly as possible. And that's where you start to talk about, Daniel, to your point about social, how do you start to react to social interactions? And especially, Brian, you and I have had conversations about millennials and the impact that millennials will have had, and also the next generation beyond that. And so we start to think about how all of these different dynamics come together, and what you realize is you need a new way of operating, and you need to be far more responsive to customer demand and customer interaction. And so the only way you're going to be able to do that is by leveraging some of these newer methodologies and technologies so that you can start to up-level the conversation in the C-suite and start talking about business advantage. So it's less about the latest and greatest technology. You know, the C-suite's not interested in the latest whiz-bang server with the blinky lights. You know, those days are long since over. Although, that being said, I did write a piece about cloud being a boardroom conversation recently because I was a little surprised to see that coming up in more than one case. But that aside, the interest that I see is in up-leveling the conversation so that we can talk about how do we leverage technology for business advantage? How do we start to look at new opportunities for business growth? And of the folks that I'm working with and talking to, that's exactly the reason why we're looking at cloud and some of the other more enabling technologies, is to get out of the weeds of technology and get more into that business focus.
It's funny you say that. One of my favorite lines ever when I was on the technology side and in the sales side of technology was, we don't sell technology to solve technology problems, we sell technology to solve business problems. And really what cloud is the ultimate, you know, leverage for solving business problems. And I think that, you know, what we've done is we've created sort of a nomenclature, almost a market, I call it a marketecture of cloud. But really, in the end, it's all about what problem are you trying to solve, and then you sort of work backwards, right?
That's right. That's right. And Daniel, you bring up a great point, and this goes back to my earlier comment about the anthropology of IT. If we think about where technology started, right, is not an indicator of where we're going, but just something to start to understand where we've been. If we look back, initially IT was, you know, those big rooms full of computers, and I gave a talk in Monaco several months back now, but I talked about this very issue where when we started talking about technology and IT, we talked about rooms full of computers. But why were we doing that? We were doing that to solve a business problem. We were looking to solve a technological problem of doing calculations much more quickly, right, and solving problems much more quickly. We kind of lost our way over the last few decades where we got a little too far away from the business problem and started focusing more on the technology. But I definitely see a shift back toward solving business problems and focusing on the business problem first and leveraging technology second.
So I'm getting a couple of bonus questions that are popping in along the way. I got one for the end that I'm going to say, but I got one that comes right now. What do you think, like, if you were to say, what is the biggest business problem, say, for enterprise right now? We'll start with enterprise, maybe we'll work down to the SMB, that cloud is really solving for, you know, if you had to pick one thing, say you only get one thing you get to do with cloud, what would you tell the enterprise to do with it? This is hard, I know.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things you could do. If you could do one thing with cloud, I would, and again, this is nothing new for those of you that have followed me for some time, but I would look at it holistically. How do you start to enable a cloud-first methodology, where you look at leveraging cloud so that you get out of the weeds of the technology and kind of up-level the conversation? I know I sound like but what I think that does is it enables you to cycle up and down depending on how your company reacts. I mean, we just saw news this morning that said that the economy is actually slowing down. Okay, so for those organizations that are using traditional infrastructure that have been sizing and architecting it for extreme growth, how are they going to be able to cycle that down? They've essentially committed the organization for some period of time toward that infrastructure because there's a long depreciation cycle that goes with it. If you're leveraging cloud, it gives you an opportunity to be able to pare back and cycle back as your business starts to slow. And then as it starts to grow, you can grow again. But it's not just about flexibility, it's also about responsiveness. So if you need to pull back on an application or a service or need to grow that very quickly, you can do that with cloud. And it's that timing piece too.
I love it. See, I was actually talking to a client yesterday, and we're working on it's on the video collaboration side. We talk about flexible consumption or, you know, elasticity, right, as a service. But I think that's really what cloud ends up offering is say, hey, you know, our organization is going to jump and we're going to grow 200% in 6 months, right? How does the cloud make that so much more possible than a traditional infrastructure? But then say all of a sudden, you know what, project ends, we're Boeing, we built 1,000 airplanes, we hired all these people, and now we're going to get rid of all these people because the project's over.
Yeah.
And cloud, like, you can almost, with the right SaaS mixed with cloud, you can almost, like, it's like a lever. It was almost like agile development can be like on Ruby or something, you know.
Yeah.
You can throttle it back and get it back to a price point where it's under your control. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, you do. I will say, though, that you do have to watch the horizon in which you're having that conversation, because if the horizon is far enough out, then the advantage that cloud brings you is less. But if you have predictability for a long period of time, there are some economic factors that come into play that kind of take away from cloud. But there are very few use cases in mass that can work against that. So for the vast majority of folks, you're going to be looking at a shorter horizon and need that flexibility and that responsiveness.
No, I think that's a really good point. And we have, Brian Ferguson on Twitter said, for question 3, cloud frees IT to do things to drive business, not maintain infrastructure, which is something I know that, I working for a modular data center that was implementing DCIM software in my previous life, that was something we focused on a lot. And another one, Anthony Borlo had said, IT no longer just supports the business, IT is now the business. Cloud is quickening that transition. I was curious, what do you think about that part, being IT is now the business, the scale and the cloud being, I love, when I talk cloud, I always talk about it increases the rate that we can innovate, which is what all of these companies want. But of course, you have to have culture change, you need to be able to collaborate, you have to have new tech skills because these teams. So when you think about cloud making IT now the business, how does that work for you? I know that's another one of these bonus questions, but I think we have some really great dialogue going on in the Twitter. I wanted to bring that in.
Yeah, I think it's very true. I mean, I talk about this in the context of the three-legged race, where there are 3 components that need to all move in unison. And we've all done the three-legged race at a picnic, right? Where you've both got 2 people have one leg in a sack, and you've got to try and coordinate and move forward at the same time. Leg or one person moving forward, if you don't have the second person moving with you so that you get that third leg, it becomes kind of problematic. And so those 3 legs are the IT organization, the CIO, and the other lines of business. And so how do you start to move the 3 of those together in concert? And I believe that the CIO is the one that is best positioned to do that, to coordinate that effort. But then going back to the question about the business is technology and kind of that interaction between the two, I do think that companies across the board are leveraging technology more and more. And what I mean by that is that the company is becoming very technologically centric, and technology is what really helps a company innovate. It's what helps a company grow. It also provides kind of a fundamental foundation. Think about it this way. Imagine a company that doesn't have any technology in it. How does it function? How does it interact with customers? How does it grow? How does it track money? And that's really, really hard to do today. In the past, you might be able to say, okay, well, we could do it in the past, but the reality is you can't even manage your books today without technology, let alone interact with customers. Going back, Daniel, to something you were saying around the social aspect. Right? And Brian, on the millennial side, if you want to interact with customers, you need to figure out how to use one of these and plug these in. And in a traditional company that doesn't have technology, how do you take one of these and plug it in?
No, that's the truth. And not only that, but you have to be playing where the players are at. So you have to be utilizing the technology. We talk about mobile recruiting and some of the other Twitter chats and things that we were, there's a HR tech conference going on in Vegas right now, and one of their big things is, how do we embrace mobile when it's content? How do we embrace mobile for recruiting? And really it's, you have to have a cloud solution and a social solution that allows you to integrate mobile correctly, as well as a security solution. As someone that I did 9 years cyber before the tech world, I always have to remember to put that hat on, even though I always lean towards, I think Daniel always says it best that we gave up our privacy so that we could have convenience, which I am a big fan of. But I think that kind of leads us perfectly into question 4, where we're, for the CIO of tomorrow. So and this is really for the CIO or for anyone in a tech leadership role. is it a new job description or is it a new set of skill sets? Because I think the argument of, I think you and I have had this numerous times, is the CIO dead, or what's the new role of the CIO? How does the CIO play with a CDO or a CDS or a CMO? So I'm curious, from what do you think about the new CIO, the CIO of tomorrow? Because what does that involve or entail?
Yeah, there are plenty of folks that say that the CIO is dead or that role is dead, and they're in the CIO circles, and you may have heard this. There's been the analogy that CIO stands for career is over. But the reality is that if we think about the traditional CIO, the one that's more operationally focused, that doesn't think about the business advantage, but really focuses on responding to company needs. The internet's broken, my computer's broken, can you install this app? That's more of the attributes of a traditional CIO that is more technologically focused as opposed to business focused. And then there's this new type of CIO that's more of the transformational CIO. And this particular individual is really a business leader first that happens to have responsibility for IT. And that's a very, very, very different both focus, but also conversation and language that starts to get used. So you start to think about how organizations are leveraging technology, but you're thinking about it constantly, all the way down to the most junior developer, in terms of what they're doing and how that affects the company. So it could be a developer that's able to say, I'm programming this particular aspect, and here's how it's going to help our marketing department provide additional access into particular prospects or new areas of the market that we haven't been able to explore before. I mean, being able to connect those dots at some of the more junior levels in the IT organization, that's a very different way of thinking about the culture within IT. But it also says, okay, do I care anymore about whether I have the latest and greatest whiz-bang server, or am I more focused on what that's going to do for me? And the reality is it's the latter. Now, there's another aspect to this, which is, well, if we look at two dots, we say IT had a certain amount of spend, and now it's moving more toward the CMO. And every CMO, and I've talked to Vala, you mentioned Vala earlier, I've talked to Vala about this, but every CMO that I know, they do not want IT. It's more of a necessity right now, where they have to take it on because IT isn't ready to be able to move into that transformational role. And that we shouldn't just gloss over this, because that's not a minor change going from traditional to transformational. Again, the three-legged race comes into play in terms of the CIO, the IT organization, and what the different lines of business expect of IT. But it also requires a different culture and a different focus. And that's not for the faint of heart. And unfortunately, I think there will be a number of folks that are in the traditional side that'll never make it across.
So do you because you kind of stole the show, right, Brian? You can ask. I had a question in the window. I said, I want to talk about the CMO taking over the CIO, or the CIO is dead, which you kind of hit on everything. But one of the things that I think is worth bringing up for the crowd, because there's a lot of marketers on these channels, right, that are probably listening to this and also engaging on this, is, with BYOD, with the use of open and free applications in the business, the removal of privacy, some of the things we've kind of flirted with here. What is the company going to do about the CIO side, and how much of technology do you think the CMO will sort of by default have to take over? And my last part is it really a collaboration between a technical leader, technology leader, and a marketing leader in the future?
Well, I mean, those are two very loaded questions.
That's the point. That's how we do this show.
Well, the other thing is it depends on the individuals and depends on the culture of the company too. So you have to consider that. So what I say won't necessarily apply to every company, but I will say generally it should be more of a collaborative effort between the CIO and the CMO. Unfortunately, there are negative aspects that have been built up over time in terms of the expectations The CMO may just take the dollars or may just take the initiative and go off and build that application. I can think of one case where a marketing organization outside of IT went out and built their own CRM to find, and this is a retail, I'll leave the company out of the mix because it is a publicly traded company, but they went off outside of IT and built their own CRM because they couldn't get the engagement from the IT organization. Now, there may be very good reasons why that's the case, but I think this kind of exemplifies this temporary stopgap where IT is not ready to take it on or not capable of taking it on, yet they should. And so you have to understand where the balance comes in between the two, and this is where I think that collaboration really helps out, where the CIO and the CMO or other C-suite leaders can have that conversation openly and say, look, here's where I am, here's where I'm going, I'm not able to support your particular initiatives today, but here's where those two paths start to intersect. And that's a conversation I don't see happening frequently yet, but that's a conversation that comes as we start to mature the way we think about these organizations collaborating more down the road.
So maybe this spawns us into the next question then. So new roles, new people, new personalities, new technologies. From an enterprise and even for the SMB, because I think SMBs are a really key conversation with cloud right now, is what changes do these businesses need to be embracing, in order to?
Yeah, so SMB's interesting. It's and I have some experience working in the SMB market, although the vast majority of my career is in the enterprise space. The SMB should be the early adopter of cloud. They're easier to move. They're less complicated. The change is that typically that engagement is not going to come from internal because a lot of the SMB or SME organizations don't have a large or don't even have an IT organization. It might be the office manager. It might be someone that's technologically savvy, but not necessarily that's their key role. So what we have to do is look toward the managed service provider, the MSP, as the way to start evolving those conversations, because typically the SMB will look toward the MSP for guidance. The problem is that the MSP has a conflict, and that conflict is that there are greater revenues in being able to support traditional infrastructure and traditional on-prem services over cloud-based services. And so if they suggest to a client that they move from their traditional to a cloud-based service, they may give up a fair amount of revenue in doing so. But I do think that's the right thing to do because there are other opportunities that they could use to augment and support that revenue. But again, it depends on whether you're talking about SMB and what they're trying to do. And I do think from an adoption standpoint and from an advantage standpoint, equally across enterprise SMB, they both have significant opportunities, but for very different reasons.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think, and Stuart Appley, who of course you gave, he said thanks for the shout out on Twitter. He said, Tim, spot on when you say CIO needs to be a business leader who happens to know technology. So I think the debate going on Twitter right now is definitely the same debate that Tim, you and I have had. We've all been kind of listening in, and even kind of I guess to catalyst on that. What is your opinion? I wrote a bunch of blog posts a while back on shadow IT being one of the biggest drivers of cloud being embraced, because as soon as the CEOs and the CIOs realized that all of these other groups and departments weren't willing to go through the hoops and the processes, they could sign up for Box, they could sign up for Twilio, they could sign up for a CRM like Nimble without ever having to go through the CIO. One of those things that came up, and I don't think I've ever picked your brain on it, is that idea of a chief marketing technologist. Is that something that you've heard, or what are your thoughts kind of on that when we think about I guess the role between the CMO and the CIO?
Well, you've got a couple different questions in there, Brian, right? You
We
know,
like
that
doing that, by the way.
That's what I do. That's what I know. I like to drill it on. I need to learn how to cut those questions off better.
I'm trying to think of the movie. I only Back to School, Rodney Dangerfield. I only have one question in 23 parts, right?
Yes.
But you know, one of the things that I think about, you know, let's talk about shadow IT specifically, because I think this kind of evokes an interesting conversation in its own right. I have long since believed that shadow IT is something you should embrace, not something you should fear. But that requires a level of maturity in terms of the culture and the mindset within the organization. Now, that's not to say that shadow IT is all good. I do think that shadow IT does bring some risk, but I think it's important to educate and manage that risk appropriately. And I want to be crystal clear about this, manage does not equal control. Manage does not equal control.
Real quick, so for the audience and the less technical people, shadow IT. Just give us the quick rundown of what that is, in case anyone out there doesn't know the terminology.
Yeah, so shadow IT is really, let's say your marketing organization. You know, we've been talking about marketing specifically. Let's say they step up and start building out technological solutions, and they might be building contracts with providers on their own outside of the purview of IT. They might even have people that are dedicated or IT focused, but they're not part of the IT organization, meaning they don't report into IT even on a dotted line basis. They report, say, up through the CMO. And that's just marketing, but it could come up in product development, engineering, just about any organization outside of IT. So it's these small pockets of IT-focused or technologically focused folks that are outside of IT. And so the fear is, what are these people doing outside of IT, and does that present a risk to the enterprise or to the organization? Most people believe that it does. Well, most people within IT, let me be clear about this, most people within IT believe that that's a fear and that's a problem. Shadow IT is a problem. But I do think there are some things that you have to manage, again, differentiating between manage and control, but you have to manage so that they can understand, you know, what are the risks around data privacy? What are the risks around application access? And does it create opportunities from a risk standpoint or security standpoint that have to be considered? Those are things that typically those outside of IT organizations don't have the purview, experience, or wherewithal to kind of wrap their arms around because they haven't necessarily had to do that. And so I think that's where a lot of the risk comes from. But I do think there's an opportunity to educate those folks and let them be the innovators within the organization. Let them be kind of the folks that are out there to say, okay, yeah, let's give you, if I'm in IT, let me give you some space to be able to go out and tinker and toy and put some innovative effort toward. And if that becomes something that we want to explore further, then maybe we bring that into the IT organization and make it enterprise ready. So I think there's a balance to be struck, but you have to consider a number of different factors that are going to go well beyond this chat when you start thinking about how to best leverage shadow IT. But definitely don't fear it.
Nothing goes beyond this chat. It's all encompassing. One question, 276 exponential parts.
Yes.
60 minutes.
I'm going to need another cup of coffee for that one.
No kidding.
We'll send you a Starbucks card.
It's funny because you hear, you know, I think, you know, the underlying thing there was that, you know, leadership has to trust its management and trust its employees. There's an element there where, you know, I think it was always funny with me with shadow IT was, you know, it's hard to come down on shadow IT if it's doing it within your security boundaries, because technically they're embracing or bringing in technology to do their job better, right? So that's something I really liked how you said it. Shadow IT needs to be managed, not controlled, and I blasted that out there on Twitter, and it's been floating around the retweet world because it's definitely one that I think is, you know, very important. And you know, Stuart Apperly also said on there, you know, the roles of the CIO and the CMT, the marketing technologists, are definitely blurring, and I think that's important element as well. And so when we get into question 6 here, how have the users and the employees changed the demand for corporate IT?
Well, I think the biggest impact has been the awareness. I don't have to teach a person how to turn on a computer anymore. I don't have to teach them how to do basic functions in a computer. I don't have to teach them how to use this little thing, right? I don't have to have training classes. I can remember back several years in organizations where we would actually hold training classes on how to use technology and just basic fundamental. This is where you turn on the computer. This is how you put a CD in the drive. I mean, okay, so that kind of dates it a little bit, but my point is the generations that are in the workforce that have recently entered the workforce in the last probably 5 years now, they are the first generations that started from birth with technology in the household. My generation, we didn't have computers in the house when I was growing up. It wasn't until till high school and after that I really started to get into computers. So we're starting to see greater comfort and greater awareness amongst the workforce in terms of how they use, how they adopt, how comfortable they are in using technology. We've heard about the sharing generation, which is share everything, and I think that can be risky too if you don't have an awareness. But my point is, this has all helped the IT organization because now instead of kind of focusing on the technology, we can focus more on what you can do with the technology. So it's less about the mechanics of how to operate it and more about what you can do with it. And that just helps in the up-leveling of the conversation so that we can talk about business advantage, we can talk about, okay, when you're using a mobile device, how do you start to engage with customers from a social perspective? I don't have to explain how to use this device. I might only have to explain how to use the social application on the device. So it's changes like that I think really kind of help and changes that we're starting to see. And I think that will only increase as we go through time.
So let me answer a little question here then. I love talking consumerization of IT, and I think that's sort of what you're spurring here is the conversation on consumerization. When people ask me what that means, I always use BlackBerry as an example. That first time a CEO came home with his iPhone and said, "Wait, I can get my email on this thing, and I can read the web on this thing." And then suddenly he goes into work, he slapped the thing down on the CIO's desk and said, "I want this to work for work," right? And that was kind of like one of those great first examples, but there's many. What do you think the next big consumerization where the consumer use is going to be driven into the workplace and adopted at the enterprise and business level?
Yeah, before I get to that question, let me kind of give you a great story. So I was at a CIO conference moderating a panel. This was a few years back now. Okay. And the CIO was approached by the CEO, and their standard was BlackBerry within this particular organization. And the CEO comes in, and I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This was crazy. But the CEO approached the CIO and said, "Hey, I've got this new iPhone that I just got over the weekend. Can you help me get it set up?" And the CIO said, "Okay, give me the iPhone, and we'll get it back to you. We'll get it back to you in a day or two." Turns around, comes back to the CEO, and drops a BlackBerry on his desk and says, "Here you go." And the CEO goes, "Wait a second, I gave you an iPhone. I was wanting that to get set up." He goes, "Our corporate standard is BlackBerry. You can use a BlackBerry." And I think this just speaks to a number of different aspects, but this is a real story told by the CIO. And I got to tell you, there were at the time several folks in the room that were kind of scratching their heads like, okay, you've got some gumption to be able to say that against the CEO. But the other thing is, I think it kind of showed that closed-mindedness of, okay, how do we start to evolve and how do we start to think differently about the consumerization of IT? But it goes beyond just mobile devices like smartphones. I think the next big piece that we're going to see is the wearables. And it's not just wearables in the sense of the fitness things. I think Brian, I don't wear one, but Brian,
I have a Pebble on. Yep.
There you go. So the Pebble, the Fitbit, the Apple Watch when it comes out. There are a myriad of different technologies that are either in the pipeline or out today. And I think what we're going to start to see is that's going to start to drive some of the interaction both from customers in terms of their interactions with companies, and also from employees in terms of their interactions with companies. So, for example, there's been some conversation of what happens if I were to have a wearable that takes health telemetry, and based on that, it could potentially reduce the company's score for health benefits. And so then that has a demonstrable impact to their premiums and whatnot. I mean, that's a cultural shift, right? Because
Right.
who's gonna want to get there? But I think those are the kinds of things and kinds of examples where we're going to find ways to plug all this together and make sense of it. And I can think of a great example. When I was at Stanford University, one of the things that we were looking to do from a disaster standpoint is what happens if there's a major earthquake or a major disaster. The one thing that we were more fearful of, and I think it plays well today, is an epidemic. So if you had an epidemic where you couldn't come to campus, people had to stay home, they couldn't travel, they couldn't move, or an earthquake. I mean, you could have the same kind of scenario with an earthquake. How do you reach out to people? How do you figure out where people are at that point in time? And at the time, we were looking at ways to leverage text messaging, and there were services that allowed you to send a text message to someone, and they had to respond with like a 1 if they're okay, a 2 if they need help, things like that. What if at any point in time I could figure out exactly where everyone that was associated with the campus, staff, faculty, or students, be able to tell exactly where they were and exactly their state in terms from a health perspective. I mean, that could be interesting. Now that's thinking way out there, but those are the kinds of interactions I think we'll start to see more and more, is how to take some of these wearables and tie it into the core business of what our business is and what we're doing.
No, I think
that's where I think we'll see the innovation come from.
Because it's all about that data, right? I mean, I wear a job on Up as well, and I actually give that I send that data to my doctor today because it's not something that he asked for, but I go for a regular heart checkup, and I give him that data. It sees my sleep patterns, and one of the things that the CEO of my last company said, he was always like, we have all this data, we have all this technology, but the only thing that we only get one of is our body, and yet we don't have all of the data coming off there. And I think not only how to be more productive. We have people working from home and remote, and some of us, if you're being more active, if you have a standing desk versus a sitting desk, like all of this data that we're now going to be able to drive differently. And actually, one of the questions we got from the audience, I want to throw in there before we get into the last one. Brian Yarnish asked, and I love this question because me being a software geek, how much do APIs play in that larger cloud integration, disruption? Like, how does that affect cloud as you see it?
Yeah, APIs are huge. It's getting to the point now where if you don't have the API and a wide API, meaning the API is the application, application program interface. So it's a way to interact other than through the user interface. It's a way for applications to interact directly with services. And the API is becoming the de facto standard for how applications interact with one another. If you don't have that, then you've got to do, really ugly things like screen screening and other kind of just messy ways of engaging different services. But tying these different services together is key, and that kind of goes to a whole conversation we could have on the ecosystem and the importance of the ecosystem. But the APIs are a must. In the past couple of years, it's been less so, but I would say as we're going through time, it's almost a checkbox. You've got to have an API that you can pretty much do anything and then some in the API versus the user interface. And if you don't, that becomes a real hindrance to adoption.
I think that's not only is that an interesting idea, but for me, the API empowers the user as well, and it also is that shadow IT element where I remember that the reason that when I was working originally with the first time working with a marketing department, they couldn't go get a CRM tool because there wasn't an API for that data to get into a CRM tool that was outside of their IT's group. And then you have tools like Nimble that are out there now. They can pull data from anywhere they want, LinkedIn, Google, all of this open API information. I think that is something that as more of these tools and companies embrace that API, I think it's a good thing. I think it'll allow us to drive adoption and kind of move forward there. And we've had the dialogue and everybody going in the I can't decide now if the wearable tech conversation or the CMO versus CIO has been more debated there in the Twitter stream. But I think that's a good sign, because I think that means that we're all talking about these new devices and new technology. So I'm going to jump into the last question, and it's the question I'm going to ask every week to every guest, and it's my favorite one just because it's one I got to ask for a long time when I worked in tech. So what's the craziest description or the oddest thing you've ever heard someone describe as the cloud?
Probably the funniest that I've heard is the cloud is just a mainframe in the sky.
That's a good one, mainframe in the sky. And, where's it plugged into in the sky?
Yeah, exactly. Try and lift one of those suckers up. It's I've heard a lot of crazy descriptions for cloud. Oh, it's just like SOA. It's just rebranded. It's a fad. It's there's a lot that I've heard that you just kind of step back and go, where do you? I mean, put that creativity toward really good uses, because it's really kind of interesting, but I think it's misplaced. I think it's important more to focus less on the technology and focus on what it does, and that's one of the pieces that people get into, especially as they start describing cloud. And gosh, you get into these religious battles, absolute religious battles about cloud, similar to, for those that go back to the Linux days. I mean, we used to have religious battles about Windows versus Linux and different versions of Linux, and it was crazy. And it had it was interesting, but it was crazy. And now with cloud, you get into these religious conversations about, well, this is private cloud, this is the definition of private cloud, this is the definition of public cloud. And I think while there are some general guidelines for that, getting into the nitty-gritty of trying to create a black and white line between them and around what cloud is and isn't is kind of a futile effort, and really doesn't bring value to the conversation. It's more important to start thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? How do I do it? What are the different opportunities to do that? How do I start to plug these different pieces together? And that's a more meaningful and valuable conversation, in my opinion.
We would prefer more buzzwords and acronyms, actually. That's actually, if you could stop, with all this really meaningful stuff and just give us a bunch of token words, architecture, because we're actually using this as research for a new book project. And in case you're wondering, you are on Candid Camera.
Well, in that case, it's all about the everything as a service. It's the play of SaaS versus PaaS versus infrastructure as a service. And
I was thinking that should be called IaaS.
Yeah,
is that politically incorrect?
I called it IaaS for a long time. I even whenever I saw someone sent me an email about PaaS, which was people as a service, which then I was like, well, aren't we the people that are? That was like really trying to blow my mind. I was like, that's definitely the PaaS discussion.
Yeah. Now, if you say IaaS and then you get a bunch of people on Twitter that all just say you are, then you might want to start thinking about how you're putting yourself out there, Brian.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I just avoid those really uncomfortable conversations that might be offensive to some. So it's infrastructure as a service, PaaS, SaaS, and all of the other permutations that go with it. I think we finally have started to, for the most part, move away from the put AAS behind just about anything that's offered as a service. That was more the architecture over the last probably 3 years, but that's kind of started to wane, and now we're focused on what it can do and the next kind of iteration of it.
Yeah, and I saw that same thing when I was at OpenStack earlier this year. I kind of saw that as a trend as well, as we were moving away from that discussion. And I liked, your quote there when it's really about what it does rather than the technology itself. And between you have the AWS, the soft layer, the rack space, all of these different solutions, but you really have to focus on what problem it's solving and what it's actually doing. So this is an awesome debate, and I loved all of the insights there. And Twitter was going fast and paced. I'll have to go back and look at a lot of that. But for as far as where people can get a hold of you or your website or speaking engagements, how can they connect with you further after this event? Yeah.
So best thing to do is right here on the bottom. Let's see, where is it? There it is, right there. Twitter handle T Crawford. You can also follow me on my blog at avoa.com. Also writing at GigaOM Research, which is just research.gigaohm.com. And for speaking engagements, you can get to me through the blog at avoa.com. And those are usually the best ways to reach out to me, is through my blog or through Twitter.
So I think that's a change right there, right? So if it was 2 years ago and I was asking a strategic CIO, he would have given his email address, right? And I think because you said Twitter, you said blog, you said the other sites you're blogging on. To me, that's why I'm very lucky that I can call you a friend that I've learned from for a good number of years now. From not only what you're teaching and leading others, but also how you're kind of leading the charge and not afraid to kind of practice what you preach. So, we really appreciate you coming on there. Daniel, did you have any final words from your side?
No, I just want to say thank you to Tim. Thank you to Social Fonz. He's the Fonz of social. And I wanted to thank all you out there on Twitter that actually dropped onto the video link. The conversation here is really engaging, and you guys out there on Twitter are doing a great job. So, Avnet, IBM, thank you guys as always, and we'll see you next week with another special guest. We just got to figure out who that is first.
we have a couple in mind, and actually I think based on a discussion last night and this morning with Tim and some other people, I think we're going to try to pull a panel discussion together as well. So we'll have Tim back on here again for a panel discussion in the near future. So thank you again, Tim. Thank you, everybody out there in Twitter and the Google Plus YouTube world, and those that are watching this on replay. We will see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Thanks for having me, guys.